Recording. Is that working? Yeah, we're now recording. So we're set. This is great. Welcome to the 18th Paparelli Zoom chat for entrepreneurs. Thanks for coming. The social distancing mandate was announced close to 5 months ago for those who are counting. It seems like this is all we do right now. But this has caused incredible disruption, but it's also I've seen is, and that's where I kind of focused, but it's also I've seen now that we've been through a few months of this, it's also caused incredible opportunity for a lot of companies that we deal with here in the technology business. Digital seems to rule these days, obviously. In the midst of all this, we've had leaders, as leaders had to deal with sort of this day-to-day uncertainty. And because of that, we've had guests who shared some experience. For those who haven't been here before, we had guests that talked about getting this government cash to kind of get us through. That was early, sort of in the Paparelli Zoom chats. We also talked about how to adapt to rapidly changing markets. And we had people on that talked about markets that expanded, markets that completely went away, and markets that sort of moved on people. So we learned some great lessons there. And then we also talked, we had like Dave Payne from Techstars, and we talked about how do you lead remote workers. That was an issue that we have to deal with. That's something new. Today, we talk about how to effectively communicate with all your real world stakeholders using virtual methods and tools. So our topic, short form, is virtual communication in a real world. And that was given to me by Dave Katz, who I'll be talking about in just a moment, and as our special guest here with Ali. This is the Paparelli Zoom chat for entrepreneurs. It is an interactive forum for you to discuss your issues and your opportunities. Being an entrepreneur and being a leader in business is a lonely job. So please use this forum to listen and learn, and also to share your experience and ideas. Let's help each other, because I do believe together we are stronger. We are a community of entrepreneurs. There is a resource tab in the paparelli.com site. This includes information you find valuable that you share with me and your other CEOs. If you mention it on the call, send it to me and I'll post it up there and give you the credit for it. Our house rules are listed in the chat. John is going to post those in there for us. And use this chat to ask questions. John Marshall is monitoring the chat for us, and he'll jump in from time to time if the question you ask is appropriate for the conversation that I'm having at the time with our special guest. If it's not, your question will be answered in that you can ask it directly to the special guest after we close out the Zoom call at 9:45, as the guests will stick around until 10 o'clock. They've agreed to do that. So before we get started, I always have my entrepreneur's thought of the day right from the Bible. And this is Jesus talking to his disciples. And he says, "You have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? Don't you remember anything at all?" That's Jesus speaking. And the application I have for that is keeping people engaged and coordinated in our organizations when we're in the office was hard enough. What is a leader to do now in this virtual world? And to help answer that, we have our special guest today, which is Dave Katz, and also Ali Treatto. I met Dave on a radical mentoring retreat led by my old friend, Reggie Campbell. Reggie was a friend and mentor really to the both of us. And now that he's gone, we're here to support each other, and we remain in each other's lives. And Dave's been very kind with that, and he's been a great supporter of me, and I'm a fan of his. Dave is a Georgia Tech grad, which means that you're welcome here, Dave. There's a lot of Georgia Tech grads on this call. And he's president and COO of Coca-Cola Consolidated. He leads an organization with 16,000 employees. It's a complex operation distributed over 80 offices with over $5 billion in sales. And now he's had to deal with this work from home directive that we have. Ali Treatto works with Dave. She's the Director of Talent Development at Coca-Cola Consolidated. She is a graduate of UGA, which means that we have a really good balance here between Georgia Tech and UGA. So we have methods and process, and yet we have heart, okay? Allie is working closely with Dave and his executive team to ensure the right conversation is matched to the right digital tools. So she's going to be equipping us with some pretty interesting, an interesting model that she lives by and has used at Coca-Cola Consolidated. So welcome to Dave and Allie. Please unmute yourself if you all set there. Let me hear you.
Charlie.
You there? Okay, good. Thank you. Dave, I was a little confused. I think that those of us who are not Coca-Cola people, we get a little confused sometimes as we don't understand what Coca-Cola Consolidated is, maybe to Coca-Cola. So maybe you could just give us a little bit of an overview of the company so we know who we're talking about here.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. And thanks everyone for having us today. It's an honor to be with you guys. I want to be respectful of time. I love to talk about Coca-Cola. I've been at Coca-Cola since college days. So, but I do think, since there's probably a lot of Atlanta folks, just important to and I think for entrepreneurs, the best way to think about our business, we're a franchise business. So the Coca-Cola company in Atlanta, where you see that big building downtown, is the franchisor. And what we call bottlers, we are the franchisees. And so Coca-Cola Consolidated is the largest franchisee of Coca-Cola in the United States. We cover about 20% of the US geography in our territory. And I think probably important to remember, just because we kind of talk about businesses, the Coke business actually started as a number of very small businesses. So at one point in the United States, there were over 1,000 franchisees of Coca-Cola. And our company basically was built through the consolidation, thus the name Coca-Cola Consolidated, the consolidation of a number of those family businesses over the years. And so although we've grown to be a pretty decent sized company, we are at our heart a community of small businesses. And so if you go out in our geography, you typically won't see Coca-Cola Consolidated. You'll see signs that say like the Coca-Cola Bottling Company of Wilmington, North Carolina, where we're doing business. That's kind of the local field.
What about so how do you, if you've got these people, you did this gigantic, what we would call a roll up. What's really interesting is to know that Coca-Cola was really a licensing company, which is pretty cool to kind of think about, because we have those kind of deals and technologies all the time. And as an investor, I always look and say, man, I don't know how that's ever going to work. Well, it certainly worked here. But you've done this roll up of all of these franchisees, okay, covering 20%. How do you kind of bring all those family businesses under some sort of a corporate mission that they all can sort of really submit to and support? So how does that work?
Yeah, it's been kind of cool to watch. I should have added my boss, the chairman of our company, Frank Harrison. His great-grandfather was actually one of the original Coca-Cola bottlers. And so we have that kind of spirit of family that's kind of permeated, 4 generations. We've got the 5th generation in the business. Frank's a really strong believer. We kind of view ourselves as a purpose-driven company. And our corporate purpose statement starts with honoring God in all we do. And because of that purpose, kind of makes us at our core a very relational company. So I would say, if you were to kind of ask what the culture's like, that's at the core of how we honor God, is by building relationships with each other, with our customers, and with our communities.
When you say honoring God in all that you do, what kind of values does that drive? You said one, it's relational. Okay.
Yeah,
what kind of values, like if you say, I know that with Allie, she's probably talking about values too when onboarding employees and things. So how do those values get driven from the mission?
We've got a list of 10. I won't give you all 10 of them, but I think, and again, I think values, I'm sure most of your companies have a set of corporate values. I think if I were to kind of think about the most important ones for us, honesty and integrity, really top of the list. It's about truth, it's about trust, and that's kind of the core of how we build relationships. Humility is very much at the top of the list for us. And kind of that whole notion of supportiveness. We're big on servant leadership. And so how we support each other and our communities and our fellow teammates is a big piece of the core of our culture.
Yeah. What's interesting is just recently I've seen this subject come up a few times, if people are trying to hold on to their culture during this social distancing, if you will. But one of the things that I've recognized is that whoever your God is that's what drives your values. All right. So if you kind of look at sort of the gods of Wall Street, right? I mean, the god of Wall Street is, right, the transaction or the money, and that drives a set of values. And here you are with this, honoring God in all you do. That sets and drives values. Now, you gave me this topic. When I called Dave and Allie, I said, look, I'm really trying to drive to some topic that people will be interested in. And I was flopping around at the end of the call. Dave said, the topic really is virtual communication in a real world. So why is that an issue for you as the COO of a $5 billion company here?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the whole thing about real world, our team, so 16,000 or so teammates, probably 14,500 of them have not been at home working. They've been manufacturing products in plants. They've been working in warehouses. They've been driving trucks. They've been calling on grocery stores because we were deemed an essential business. And so unlike many companies that kind of locked down and everybody went home, we weren't able to do that. So the majority of our teammates were out there just like they had, I wouldn't say just like, but doing their jobs like they've always had to do their jobs. And so
sort of the grocery business. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And so this has been a challenge because the way we have done our business historically, even in my role, is I spend most of my time out in the field with those teammates. I'm out in stores, I'm in the plants, I'm in the warehouses. We're a very face-to-face. I mean, everything that happened in our business.
So it doesn't seem like anything changed for you?
For most of our company, it didn't. For me, because I work in an office, it changed wildly.
Okay.
And I haven't been working from home, but I went.
So you're telling me, Dave, that as the COO of this big company, they won't allow you into the grocery stores?
They'll allow me in the grocery stores, but I think for the most part, we tried to respect the fact that we were trying to limit social interaction. So the people that didn't have to be out didn't go out. And so I started about 5.5 weeks ago getting back out in the marketplace a day a week from what would have historically been 3 or 4 days a week in the market for me. So very much forced into a virtual leadership role.
So what was it like before, and what have you been struggling with after this with the social distancing? So,
well, I think I kind of hit on the before is, again, face-to-face, interactional, relational type of leadership.
So you were literally in the field all the time with all of these
Most
people.
of the time, yes.
Yeah, going to all of the different offices, the 80 offices you talked about and everything, or they're not really offices. A lot of them are manufacturing plants and things. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, one thing you told me is you said, you didn't care if it was a one-on-one meeting or if it was a meeting or you had to meet with 1,000 people. You still did it in person.
Yep. Exactly. We are because of the way the business grew up, we're just a face-to-face business. That's the way we've always been, and done very little. I mean, Allie will probably talk a little bit about this as well. Training has always been live training. We bring people into conference rooms to train them. Meetings and sales rallies have always been, get a bunch of people at a hotel and rally up the troops. And so it's been very little virtual leadership or communication in our company in total.
So this is a huge change in that regard.
It certainly has been.
So what happened?
Well, I think we've learned a lot, and I think we'll talk about some of that. I mean, Charlie, I shared the story with you. I think, early on, I've got a gentleman that works for me, and because people weren't coming into the office and they were communicating via text message and email in an environment we didn't used to communicate that way, I had a guy sending me messages, and literally every message I got, I thought he was mad at me, because that's just the way he communicates on text message. You don't get any body language. You don't get any kind of sparkle in the eyes, smile, anything like that. You just kind of get here's the facts and the message. And so we realized early on, because of the relational nature of our business, not being face-to-face, even amongst the leaders, was causing some disconnect in how we are communicating, and recognized that that's probably the case for, the 14,000 people that are out in stores that aren't getting to see us.
What happened with this one guy? Kind of finished the story. So he sounds like he's really annoyed at you. right?
Yeah,
And he's sending you these texts. So how did you resolve it?
I literally ended up giving him a call one day after this was probably the third time it had happened, and I'm kind of in my head thinking, what have I done to kind of get this guy mad at me? Did I say something wrong? I'm reading my message back to him, and I finally asked him, like, what did I say? Why are you so mad? And he was totally surprised. He wasn't mad at all. It's just that's his style of text message, and because there's no body language and no kind of a feel for what the person's thinking or doing, you just kind of take it however you're going to personally interpret that.
Right. You can't see their eyes. You can't hear their voice. Yeah. But this has been a very difficult time too. Not only has COVID hit, which created this separation, but then I know you have a very diverse workforce, and you were faced with this whole Black Lives Matter movement, sort of all this popped up, right? And as the COO of a workforce that's this diverse and so community based, what did you do about that? How did you handle that?
Yeah, and so again, I think I want to make sure I let Allie kind of talk about how we frame this up a little bit, but I think maybe this will give some context for what she's going to share, is this recognition that different channels work for different things. And so Charlie, if I work for you and it's time for me to report my sales numbers, a text message is probably fine. Here's how much I sold, here's how we're doing. But on an issue like race, which has got such an emotional context to it, and so much complexity about,
and personal. Yeah, it's very
about
personal.
the issues and how it strikes people. And so I shared with Charlie the other day, we actually decided the topic was important enough and meaningful enough that we couldn't do it virtually. And so I brought a group of 10 of our Black teammates together. We booked a conference room that holds about 65 people, and we only had 10 people so we could stay separate, but just recognizing the fact that it was going to be impossible to communicate the emotion, two-way emotion of the situation in a virtual environment. Even a Zoom chat like this is just hard to do to get a good read for the body language and everything. And so recognizing, those topics that have enough complexity and emotional energy that we got to bring people together.
Before I dig a little into that meeting, okay, one of the things that I'd like you to tell me is when all of this happened, you knew you had to do something. What thoughts were going through your mind as the COO of this thing, that all of a sudden this huge issue, which became a national, in fact, international issue, just sitting on your desk? What thoughts did you initially have, and how did you sort of move? How did you move forward to end up with that meeting?
I think this is going to sound squishy as a leader, and so some of the people on the call.
You're not squishy. Come on.
Kind of like a soft answer. I really do. I say it all the time around here. I'm sitting in our corporate office today. There are very few great ideas in our company that come out of this office. There are so many smart people. Allie's excluded. Allie has lots of great ideas in this office, but there's so many great minds around our company. And so I've been in this role for almost 2 years now. I have learned the lesson over and over that if something really complex happens in our business, the best thing I can do is to gather a group of our employees and just beat it up in a room together and understand. Okay. My big word with that team is empathy. I've got to understand what they're feeling, not just the facts of the situation, but what are they feeling? And then what can we do about that to make people feel like they belong more? And that's been true of COVID as much as it has been the racial issues in our country.
So with regard to these racial issues here in this meeting that you had, that's what you did is you didn't really ponder this very long. You just exercised your reflex, which is saying we just need to get together and talk about it.
Yeah.
And how did that go?
It was phenomenal, and I saw a couple of familiar faces on the call from the world of mentoring. Charlie, you mentioned radical mentoring. We did our first session kind of like a radical mentoring session where everybody shared their story. And we just went around the room and people talked about how they grew up and where they grew up and the family situation and what being Black meant to their personal journey and created almost a community around that. And so I think that just opened the doors for people to be honest in assessing where we're at and what we do well and what we need to change at our company. And so It's really about the power of listening, learning, and creating that community.
Did you do any kind of follow on to that? I keep digging on this because this is a difficult subject, and it's not being talked about a lot because people they want to seem engaged, but they want to stay as far away as possible from it.
Yeah.
And you seem to have jumped into it. The fact that you brought it up in our conversation was really, it was a breath of fresh air for me, because I think that's not a squishy leader that does that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Allie was in a separate meeting we had on this topic, and it kind of got the spark going of the need for people to speak on both sides of the issue. And I think this is, I mean, we may be a little off topic here, Charlie, but in our country, I think part of the problem that everyone's afraid to speak into this issue, and the biggest opportunity we have is to come together and talk. Right. Because I think what we are finding at our company, and I think what our country would find, is we've got a heck of a lot more in common than we have different. Mm-hmm. And the world has kind of got us going separate ways, and I think there's so much opportunity to come together and solve the challenges we have together. And so I think that's where the power's been in this, and the value of kind of just as a leader diving in and saying, okay, I kicked off that meeting saying, I know I'm going to say something stupid. I know I'm going to say something offensive. So you guys all have permission to call me out and say, that's not the right way to speak about this topic.
Yeah. My coach was right here. This is Yvonne Bryant Johnson. She was my coach in this. And she had a lot of responsibility trying to coach me. I want to tell you. But Yvonne, thanks you so much for doing such a great job there. But how did that then, so you went back to your roots from a communication standpoint, a value standpoint. You said, this is so important. We have to be face to face. All right. But it was 10 people out of 16,000 people. So how did that then have to move through the organization? That would be a huge issue that had to be tackled with virtual communications or maybe other face to face. I don't know. How'd you do it?
Yeah, I want to be honest. Like, I may be giving the impression we got this figured out. We don't have it figured out yet. We are figuring it out.
No, that's why I wanted you. I know you don't have it figured out. That's what we're trying to do. We want to know that you're wrestling with it and what's working, what's not working. And that's part of what this is about.
Yeah, I think I'd say a couple things. And again, you said speaking off the top of your head. I'm definitely speaking off the top of my head now. I think the model of groups getting together to talk, because I've talked about this tons of times inside the company, is given permission for other leaders to do the same thing. Okay. So you're starting to see different groups pop up around the company now doing exactly what we did in that first session. And that's going to start the flywheel of change as well, because, as people get permission to gather in groups and see what they have in common and see what we can do better, we're going to see some behavior change out of that. And then the second thing we're working on, much like our purpose statement, is building out a framework, not a set of rules, but building out a framework for our teams to say, here's where we stand on these issues. Here's the strategies we want to pursue. Now you localize that to your market, because again, we're kind of this family of local businesses, and the middle of West Virginia doesn't feel like Charleston, South Carolina, doesn't feel like Charlotte, North Carolina. So every community's got a different feel and different issues inside those communities.
Right, that makes sense. So Allie, let me jump to you here a little bit. You've been so patient with me here that I've been taking Dave's time to put him on the spot, but I'll come back to Dave and ask him a few more tough questions, kind of keep him there. I'm not gonna buy off in that I'm a little squish. I don't want to come across as squishy. Yeah. That's just, I don't think that, I think Allie, you'd agree. He's not very much a squishy leader here.
No, I would definitely not use the term squishy. But as I'm tying together what you're discussing, it's so relevant to the communication topic. And you asked that question. So now what? You've got this group of 10, which you have a room, you have a place you can do in person, which completely fits our model of when you would want to have this communication in person. And for example, to tell your personal story, it's not going to happen over a conference call. People are not going to open up that way. But the idea that you're in person, that's the only way to be comfortable saying, okay, I'm going to tell you some things about myself that would typically not come up in the workplace. But exactly to your point, how do you do this with, 16,000? And one, encouraging it in those smaller groups like Dave did. But two, something else I'll bring up is, as Dave and this team puts together the framework, how are we going to communicate that to the full organization? And one of the ways that we have been leveraging the idea that people need to hear your tone of voice, they need to see your face to fully interpret what your message is and receive it the way you intended it, is we're using a lot of video communication. So as opposed to Dave putting together a beautifully written email vetted by so many people, and sending that out, I'm sure that, and I've seen these coming out, and I'm sure there'll be another, of Dave just speaking to the camera and speaking to us. And it feels much more personal. And
Wow.
his authenticity, not squishiness, but his authenticity, it comes through because we can see what he's really saying.
That's hard to do, though. That's
Very
hard to do too, because speaking to a camera, it takes time to get comfortable with that. We watch these newscasters and all that, and we realize they've got a cameraman and they've got a couple of producers there, and they're just speaking into this camera, and
Sure.
It makes it sound like they're so good. They're speaking to us one-on-one. That just takes takes time, I think, to kind of get there. And coaching, you have to be open to that. But I'm interested, Allie, how did this issue, like when I talked to Dave about this a couple of months ago, he immediately engaged with you. So how did this issue, land on your desk?
Sure.
I mean, there's a lot of people. There's 16,000 people. Why you, right?
Sure. So within talent development, we are responsible for the skill sets of all of our teammates and making sure that they are successful today. And we also consider and work with leaders on what those skill sets will need tomorrow and how to be successful in the future, and make sure we're bringing in new people as well.
So communication is part of that skill set. Communication
is key. And it's funny because, Charlie, you mentioned, we hear the word communication and it can almost be this eye roll, like, yes, that's like basic. That's like basic in your degree at Tech or UGA, right? But
not a Tech. Okay.
But the fact is that communication is how we experience each other. And when you really dive into your brand and how somebody experiences you, communication is at the heart of that. And so you're either increasing trust or damaging relationships with every interaction, with everything that you say, the way you say it. And we want to make sure that we're doing this the right way. And it's been so easy in the past to just come together in person, like Dave said. So what do we do now that we've been thrown into a situation where that's not always possible? And
what happens? Let me interrupt just a second. What are these other leaders? Okay, I'm sure that Dave is sort of sending leaders to you, and then there's other people that they just follow you and they need your advice. What are these leaders that are in your organization? What are they asking for? What are they finding that they really need help with?
Sure.
And maybe tell me a story around that. That'd be good.
Yeah, I would say there's several. I can tell you that the leaders that come to me, it maybe took them a little longer to realize something's not working. And you could see it with the people that it wasn't working for almost first. I think people were questioning things. What does this really mean? Teammates were really defaulting to the tools and methods for communication that were the most convenient and what they were familiar with. So those emails and text messages, like Dave mentioned earlier. And I had a leader who was in a very typical situation that we've probably all been through, where she took on a new role through a promotion and she had a new team. And she was an internal, right? So she wasn't new to the company. So she had a relationship with most of these teammates, but now she would be leading them. And that's a huge transition. And I'm seeing some nods on your cameras that we've experienced. All of a sudden, I have to build a new relationship, a different kind of trust with this group of people. And everybody would absolutely call an in-person meeting for that. You would get everybody together. Maybe you'd go out and do something fun.
So she said, what do I do? Right. So
what do I do?
What did you say? I don't know.
I said, you've got to establish what the new norms are going to be for your team. So you need to establish on one of your first team calls, a team charter, and let them know what your expectations are when it comes to videos. Are you going to use your cameras or not? What's going to be normal for you? How quickly do you expect somebody to respond to an email? There's me some leaders that say, I really expect it the same day, and others that say 24 hours is my rule. These are the things that seem really small, but can really damage your relationship. And then I also said, just because you're not in person doesn't mean that you can't start building personal relationships. So at the beginning of your calls, carve out time and do something fun. Ask people personal questions. So we came up with some different activities that you can do. We love to do something, this is just a quick tip. It's so simple, but we call it this or that. And you make everybody choose between things like college football or pro football. And so everybody got the instructions on her team to bring your favorite Coke product. So here I am holding a Dasani water bottle, and I'll go over here because I also drink a lot of coffee. And so I have my coffee mug. And so they came up with their rules, and they said, okay, if you are college sports, hold up your coffee mug. And then there was the video of everybody holding up what their choice was. And then they had some fun about it, and they went through. As she found out, for example, everyone on her team was football. She was the one basketball. She was like, oh my gosh. And what a fun moment.
But it is an icebreaker that gets
just an
so I like
icebreaker.
that we just because we're distant, we can't build it doesn't mean we can't build better relationships.
Right. And I think that's what people are letting
but
go.
you also said, look, people aren't going to tell their stories. Like when we're talking about Dave and the people he got together, he said, we went around the table, everybody told their stories. Why won't people? I mean, that's the best way to build relationships. Okay. Right. Why did you make the comment that they just won't tell their stories? Is that just at the beginning, or over time they might?
I think it's at the beginning. I really do. I think that over time you become more comfortable, and that's really what it is. It's about your comfort level. What's normal for you? Nothing feels very normal right now, I'd argue. And so if you are, talking to your COO for the first time, maybe these people have never really had a relationship with Dave. You're gonna scope things out a little bit first. You're gonna watch somebody else and see how that goes, maybe before you decide how much to share. And you're seeing things. You guys, you brought this up, and it's in our model about needing to be able to see someone's body language and how they're responding. So on a phone call, for example, I might hear this person's personal story, but I can't see Dave's reaction to it. And I want to know how Dave is reacting to that person's story before I'm ready to share my own, because maybe that's my comfort level being.
So this is a change in communication styles, right? And tools that we use. So as leaders, I'll put them in two categories. Those are those that have adopted this, open-minded, said, I need to change. And then there's those that haven't, all right? Everybody cooperates, There is a group that is, this is the way I do it. And it's been working for years, right? What makes for those, how do you kind of bring those two people, well, first of all, what causes somebody to kind of lock in place, and what's been the result of those people that haven't changed with regard to their teams?
So I would go back to our purpose statement, our culture. And you mentioned, what do we do? How do we onboard people and say, you used to be owned by this bottle, you're part of ours now. And we really do speak about servant leadership in everything we do with training. And even to something like communication. So the idea of serving others might sound so big. It might sound so, community service or really serving. But the way, if you stop and you think, how does this person want to receive this communication? You're serving them just by making the choice to be intentional about it. Okay. So I tie it back to servant leadership, and to your question about the ones that say, well, I'm a leader, and because I'm your manager, I'm doing it this way. You own how you receive it, and you just do with it as you will, but you deal with my style. Yeah. Versus those leaders that say, I care how you receive it. I understand the impact of how you'll receive my communication. I argue that, and studies will show this, there's a lot of studies out there actually, the leaders that do care, or at least the person feels they're cared for, they give discretionary effort, they're more successful, their business results thrive, their retention is higher, their turnover is lower, their business results are there.
Let me switch to Dave for just a second, and then what we're going to come back to is we're going to talk about this model that you've embraced.
I like it better when you're asking Allie questions, Charlie.
No. what do you do? What do you do with leaders that are in your organization where they said, look, you need to own, what I'm telling you, in other words, you need to figure out how to receive it. It's not up to me. So that's kind of the antithesis of good communication, right? You should be focused on an audience, right? But in the other way is, look, I'm the boss. Hey.
Yeah, and it's always a challenge. I think it's a challenge in any business. It's particularly tough in our business because there are pieces of our business that are very directive. I mean, the store has to be merchandised by 5 o'clock in the morning, like that,
Okay, yeah.
So there's not like a decision that we have to make there, like, well, just show up at 8 o'clock if you want to merchandise the store. We have to, our business requires some amount of direction. But we do, Ali mentioned it, like when we do leadership training, we talk about stuff like this, that's not servant leadership to do that. A more servant leadership way would be to say, Charlie, the store needs to be merchandised by 5. What can I do to help you be successful and get in the store merchandised by 5, instead of saying store's got to be merchandised by 5. And so we train it. And then I'm a firm believer in, I don't know where the quote came from. It's probably a Reggie Campbell quote, but culture is a reflection of the action of the leaders. And
Yeah.
so all of our leaders have to model that. And when leaders throughout our organization see people modeling the right types of behavior, they're gonna grab onto that as well.
Okay. Well, great. So then, Ali, you introduced me to a model that has had an impact on you. So first, where did this model come from, and why did you embrace it so wholeheartedly? And maybe you can just show us what that model is and discuss it. Okay.
Sure. Well, Dave brought it to me as the idea of how do we manage these issues, these problems that you've brought to the table? And we can't come together in person. So how often should we be in person? Do we say everybody has to use video all the time? Like, what's the answer? Can we give people guidelines? And so, I went out and just used a lot of the research that's out there, and there's science behind it. And, this is actually not a new study, but in the 70s, a professor named Albert Moravian did study personal communication and what does it take to be successful in that. I've delivered the message I intended for you to receive, and you received it exactly as I intended.
Okay.
And he broke it down into 3 parts, which is the words that we speak. And he said, that's only 7%. So to Dave's example, if you read something, you got 7% there. The tone of your voice, so how you're saying it, what I'm hearing as you speak. And then 55% was the body language. So being able to see the entire person in the conversation. So 55%, more than half, if you're going to buy into this study, which I think we can all agree with, has been taken away from us if we're not in person. And I even think about, I was at the grocery store, and I, as you've seen on this call, I have a big toothy smile, and I wear a mask in a grocery store in North Carolina that's a law right now. And I'm smiling at people as I walk by, and it occurred to me that I might look like a crazy person because all they're seeing is right here. Yeah. And I'm taking away the 55%, right? And so I
how
think—
did this model come in? Can you get us to the model? We're running out of time here. We got about 7 minutes.
Absolutely. So it really came down to, when is that 55% critical? And so it's really around the complexity of your message. How confusing could it be? Is there a lot of work involved? I see John's pulling this up. Thank you. Does it require a lot of interaction? And do decisions need to be made? Those are great ways of considering your complexity scale. And then the other side of it is, what's the potential for an emotional response in this message? And some things you might consider is, does the information impact your recipient directly? So am I going to personally be impacted by this? Is it open to interpretation? Is it direct enough, or could somebody decide that it means one thing, somebody else could interpret this completely differently? And then ultimately, how would you perceive the message if you were the recipient, right? Is a nice way to gauge.
So you're sitting here, and it looks like you've gotten this this 4-piece, this quadrant here, that pretty well, between complexity and emotional response. And then you've outlined around it what you're recommending are the communication tools we should be using.
Yes. And so ultimately, the facts are, for messages that are highly complex and have a high potential for emotional response, you want to be close to in person as possible, if not in person. Now, I would also argue that you could overuse that. And I mentioned this when we were first discussing it, that you can overuse video calls. So we fought hard to get people to turn on their videos. That was a big culture change for a lot of people. We've gotten really good. Well, you can actually go too far that way also. So it's not only pushing people to that quadrant. Consider if you're exhausting them with those in-person Zoom calls. Sometimes a text message or an email is the most appropriate and efficient way to communicate something so that we can continue on with our day. There's truly the best tool.
You're not
for
doing
each
what a lot of people are doing, which is we're just going to do it. It's just automatic. We're just going to have Zoom calls.
I think at first we did. I think at first we did say that.
Okay.
Everybody turn your camera on. This is the way to do it. And we realized we're exhausting ourselves, and that, no, it's okay to decide what truly is the best tool.
So you've been very intentional about what a message, when I'm a manager or I'm a leader and I have a message that I want to have a communication, you basically say, look at this chart and you should choose what's most appropriate.
Yes, and I think, again, you could even say, how do you want this to be interpreted? And also, how can you best serve this person?
I like that. I like that.
Hey, Charlie.
Yeah, Dave.
Jump in with something here too, because I think probably most of the people on the call have been doing the same thing. It's like, so what have you learned during COVID that actually is better for your business? You know, that you got forced into something. And one of the things we've been talking about in this meeting front is a lot of our face-to-face meetings, and maybe you guys are better than we are, but what we would find is we bring a whole bunch of people together for a meeting. You get in a conference room and whoosh, everybody's laptop goes up and people are checking emails and they're responding to things.
Yeah.
And part of what we've said is when we get back to whatever normal is that that face-to-face time, we're going to be much more intentional about, it's got to be upper right-hand quadrant things. We don't need to get people together to present sales results, because you can send an email and people can read sales results. So being intentional about how effective you are using the time when you actually do have people back face to face.
Yeah,
that's cool. So Dave, let me ask you, what did you learn, about virtual communications in the real world that sort of changed your behavior and made you a better leader? Because, you are a relational guy. I could just see you sort of running out and talking to everybody, everywhere. Okay. So this big change for you, like, what have you learned from this? You gave me one lesson, which is, when we get back to normal, we're not going to go back to normal. We're not flipping our laptops open again.
Yeah. I think you used the word intentional. I think intentionality is probably my biggest lesson here, is that there's a suite of tools that I probably didn't think about being a suite of tools, more focused on relational things when we're face to face. I tell internally that the way our company's split up, we have 5 market units, and each one's got a general manager. And in the past, I didn't talk to a market unit general manager unless I was out visiting them face to face. So I'd be out, maybe I'd hit them every 2 or 3 months. Well, I couldn't do that. So I was getting on the phone call. And so there's an intentionality about, hey, a phone call is okay for a check-in, and I can use that tool for some amount of it. And so I think just being intentional about that grid that Allie shared, that I can play in all 4 quadrants and have tools for all 4 quadrants.
That's great. So you've actually applied it.
Exactly.
Man, that's not squishy to me. Look, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm going to kind of wind this down here. And then again, we're going to have some time with the speakers because they've graciously given us more time. But I want to thank everybody for attending. A special thanks to Allie and Dave, for investing in our community. I know you're up there in Charlotte, but you're going to be making an impact for people, not only in our community, but the broader community, if you will. I always like to share some of my takeaways on this thing. One that really hit me was communication really starts with your values. Communication is it's the feet that they get you there. Okay. It's what makes things work. It's how you work, and you work because of why you're working, which is your values. And so communication around values is important. The other one was having communication models centered on this complexity and emotions. I think it's a great guide that'll really help us out going forward. And I love this one that you said here is it's not up to me how someone else receives it. It's up to them. But the fact of the matter is communication is about the other person, not you. So we have to choose the tool that suits them and not your impatience and immediacy. Very important. Otherwise you wind up with somebody like Dave saying, I wonder what pissed him off, and I didn't feel that way at all. So I need to be sensitive to that. So thanks again to Dave and Allie for sharing what you've learned in this virtual communication in a real world. So these are my insights, but I know that you have insights too, and I ask you to share them with me. And when I publish the summary of this call on Friday, I'll include your insights with mine, which would be great. And I'll give you credit for them, which will give you a little bit of a pump for your business. My weekly reminder is watch your cash. It goes out fast and comes in slow. We will get through this. You will get through this and learn fast, decide fast, and go fast. Next week, August 19th, my guest will be David Clapp, who's the managing partner of Carter Baldwin Executive Search. It's a large executive search firm, and we're going to be discussing ideas around helping your employees deal with their lives and kids while working from home. He's come up with some he's been very sensitive to that and come up with some great ideas. I think that it's going to be very worthwhile getting together and talking about it. So sign in early to catch up with people or meet new people. I'll be there 15 minutes early each week so we can get together as we did today. And remember, I am praying for you. I thank you for attending. This is the end of the call, and I will stop this recording, but the Zoom call will remain open so that you can ask your questions to Dave and Allie, the ones you wrote in the chat. At 10 a.m., I'll cut this off again. So thank you all for being here. It's been a blast. Okay, so we should still be open here. John, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Charlie. I tell you, Brian has a question for us. Brian, you want to shoot away?
Yeah. Hey, Dave, how you doing, man?
Brian,
Good to see you, bud.
good to see you.
So we're doing a lot of virtual real experiences, with my company. And one of the things that I'm struggling with as far as how people use chat in the Zoom, and whether you've said any, or Allie, if you can speak into this too, whether there's any sort of norms that are out there. At first, we were seeing chat being very distractive, that I'd come back and ask a person a question and they were too busy laughing with what somebody said in the chat. But then we were trying to figure out ways in which we engage the chat more and see it as a additional tool of communication. So I was just wondering if you had any sort